I'm excited about today. We're in week 3 of a little series we've been doing talking about our heart as a church, looking at our kids' ministries and how they plug into our vision of know Jesus and show Jesus. And if you've been here for the last couple weeks, then you've heard we talked about kind of taking the vision statement and making it applicable for each age group. So the first week, we were looking at our 0 through 5-year-olds, and we were talking about the idea of seeing Jesus. And our desire as a church to present them with the opportunity to see Jesus, and the fact that when they look to Jesus, what they'll see back is love, and this unconditional love, and what that empowers them to do in their relationship with Him. And then last weekend, we were talking about our 1st through 5th grade, and we talked about the ability to discover Jesus. That through play and through conversations and through inspection and through all the different things that come with that age group, they get to discover the person of who Jesus is and what that means to them. And today, we're going to be talking about the youth group. So this will be 6th grade through 12th grade. And I felt like because we were talking about the youth group, I wanted to bring an age-appropriate video that also highlights one of the characters that we've been studying. We've been studying Peter through this character study along the way. So I wanted to bring a video that I felt like really tied it in nicely for you. Again, this age it's appropriate for youth because of the youthfulness of it. So go ahead and look up at the screens real quick. I think you'll enjoy this. Hallelujah, hallelujah, roll call. Now, first of all, some of you were singing that, there were some of you singing that literally back at me, which was fun. But as you can tell by my strategic use of reels, that I am very capable of connecting with Gen Z due to understanding things. I'm really, but not just that. I know the cool lingo, like some of you are like, that video was really bussin', right? Like, am I right? Nothing gives me greater joy than just making my son regret ever teaching me any words whatsoever. Yes, you're welcome. So, now we're going to talk about the key to youth ministry, embarrassment. No, I'm just kidding. That's not it. But I am excited to talk to you about this age group. I've got two kids who are in our youth group right now, which is awesome. Oh, by the way, my wife, Vivi, she says to tell you hi and to remind you she still attends this church. This is week 2 of having sick children. She had one sick last week, and then wouldn't you know it, they tagged off, and the other one's sick this week. So they're watching online. She is still here, though, in spirit. And she says she misses you, and she loves you, and all those things. Yeah. You just made her cry at home, so thank you for that. But here's what I want to talk about. This age group is such a fun group. Some of you guys know this. I grew up going to youth ministry and being part of a youth group that I loved. Pastor Mike, our previous pastor, was actually my youth pastor growing up. I met him in 6th grade. He immediately began to put me to doing tasks and chores, which were probably completely inappropriate and against certain OSHA regulations, but we did them anyways. I only have 1 or 2 scars as a result of working with Pastor Mike, but they were worth it. And so we really enjoyed that. To show you how things have changed over the years, I have signed up for an internship. Now, remember, my dad was also on staff at the same church, so it was like a different time, a different place. And I signed up for an internship, and they didn't really give us many instructions of what this internship was. They just said, show up at this time, and you're going to do intern things. And I was like, well, I don't know what that means. And so I showed up, and, it was the, late night. This would have been early 2000s. So, of course, I was wearing a wife beater tank top, which is not appropriate to say anymore, but I don't know what else they're called, a ribbed tank top. Is that what they're called? Thank you. A ribbed tank top with really cool Abercrombie and Fitch cargo pants that were way too large, and I had to tie the string on. And then, of course, I was wearing flip-flops, because what else would you wear in the summer other than foam flip-flops? I looked so cool. So I show up to this internship because no one gave me instructions, and what I find out we're doing for the day is we are cleaning a construction site of metal debris. Okay? So clearly, by today's standards, and trust me, we have learned these lessons, I would look at a youth as myself and be like, you are not appropriately addressed for the work that is going to happen today. Do you think Pastor Mike told me that? Absolutely not. He gave me protective eyewear. He said, it's very important that you wear protective eyewear. And I'm like, fine. And he's like, here's what we're gonna do. There's this pickup truck, this flatbed pickup truck. You're gonna walk behind the pickup truck and you're gonna be picking up all these pieces of metal and different things, and you're gonna throw it into the back of the pickup truck. And it was like knee-high grass. So I'm walking through finding metal in my flip-flops, just living life. Everything about it, like if you think about it, like Pastor Andrew's like having an aneurysm over here, because like this is just like lawsuit. This is an active construction site, by the way. There is literally active construction happening at this moment. Doesn't matter, just walking through. And I see a metal stud. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about, like the metal studs they put for framing, and it was there, and I went to pick it up, and it was in the grass. And so I grabbed it, and I threw it to the back of the truck, but what I didn't realize, part of it was mangled, and so I had created a nice sickle on the opposite. And so when I threw it, it caught my hand and just like a cool move, like, and then I was like, ooh, I think that was bad. And then like blood was just like, and I was like, oh man, this is not good. I still have a cool scar. So I go to Mike, who's driving the truck, by the way, and be like, I think I cut myself. And he was like, oh, that doesn't look so bad. And I was like, good. And he's like, let me look at it. And he squeezes it, and it like, and then he's like, oh, that's your bone. And so I was like, yep. So we go to my dad, and my dad's like, okay, yeah, it's time. We probably need to take him to the hospital. Well, at this time, there was a bunch of guys who, they're like, oh, I know somebody who works at a, a clinic. They'll take care of you, no problem. So we drive over to the clinic, and what do they think is the most important thing? That they record it. They video it. So they bring a camera, and they set up this whole thing. I'm just like bleeding all over the place. No one cares. They're like, this is gonna be great video for youth this Wednesday. And again, lawsuit. No one cares. I'm like, this is like, and so they get the doctor and they get the nurses, and they're like rehearsing scripts, and it's like, okay, I want you to come in and do this. I'm like, can someone just sew up my hand? Like at any point that this would be great. I know this had to have violated rules, medical rules. I'm sure HIPAA was not involved in this. And so all that to say, I ended up getting stitches, and then I had to go back and finish the internship day. Like I didn't even get the day off. Like I had to get back at it. That was the kind of work that we used to do. But you know what? I still loved youth group. I would go right back. And so all that to say, I have a long time. I used to be the youth pastor here. But youth is like this important age because it is a really critical time in the development of young men and young women. We have some youth who are in here. But here's some things that are happening psychologically, physiologically, that are happening. Obviously a lot. But so we are beginning to see a young person's ability to think abstractly. To think about things abstractly in a different way, as opposed to just being able to see what's right in front of them. They're able to think about abstract. They begin to think about things like philosophy and politics and social issues. This is happening in this age group, depending on where you're at in that term. They are beginning, it will not actually complete until they're much older, but they're beginning to have these thoughts about long-term possibilities. Typically at this age, and this is the dangerous part, they begin the ability to think about long-term possibilities, but they don't think about long-term consequences. And that sometimes is an issue. You'll hear them laughing. But they can really try to like think about one, it just doesn't all the way connect. It'll get there, right? They start to set goals. Here's something that's really important, and this started in the age group before, but it really becomes concrete in this age frame. They begin to compare themselves to their peers, to look around at their peers and compare, and other things, and physical things, and socioeconomic things, and sports, and different ideas, intelligence. But here's some things that they want. This is some things that they want. And of course, they're going through a myriad of physical change, hormonal change, all that, but we won't get into that. But here's some things they want. One, They want independence from their parents. I know, the moms are all like, "Ooh," and the dads are like, "Get out." No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know. Right? They want independence. They want independence. They don't want to pay for anything, but they want independence. Okay? Peer influence and acceptance becomes very important, right? They want to be cool. They want to say words like bussin' and other kind of things to be really cool, and like the training, the talk and the tick and all that kind of stuff. They want to experience love. They think they're in love sometimes. Do you remember when you thought you were in love one time? I do. It was cute. They maybe have some long-term commitment in relationships, not even necessarily romantic relationships, but friendships. Sometimes it's during this time where it's like, you're gonna be my best friend for the rest of my life, and then that's just it. Like, you made a commitment, and that's what you do. So here's some things, and as parents or leaders or guardians or grandparents in this opportunity, we get this chance to encourage these teens to take on new challenges. And this is really important. This is one of the things that psychologists talk about is really important in this phase, is that you talk to your teen about not losing sight of oneself and group relationships. This is a really common thing. Your kid acts a certain way when they're with you, and then when they get in a certain group of people, they act a completely different way because they no longer choose to behave as themselves, but they choose to adapt and to morph into what the group dynamic is. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the group dynamic is bad. It just means that we have to encourage our young people to continue to walk out in their individuality, and more importantly, the character and the call that they have as young men and young women with an identity that can be found in Christ. And so we get to walk through that process. There's this idea of encouraging teens to talk to trusted adults about problems or concerns. And this is, as a parent, this is sometimes hard because even if that person is not you, it's important that they're getting advice somewhere. In many ways, that's why youth and youth group is really this powerful opportunity, because you as a parent can say something that's the right answer over and over and over again, and you just don't get it, Dad. You just don't understand what's happening. And then some other adult can say the exact same thing, and then your child will come back and telling you this incredible information that they got from someone, and you're like, I literally said that like 18 times. But it wasn't you, it was someone else. And that's the power. That's why, listen, that's partially, this is a side note, that's why church is important, because I want my kids surrounded by other people who are like-minded, who are believers, that I trust to speak into my children's life. I want them to be spoken into because I know sometimes they won't hear it from me, and I am really cool. And so if they won't hear it from me, you guys don't have a chance. No, just kidding. Sometimes you guys have to, I need other people. There have been people in this church who've come along my kids in different seasons and spoken the exact right words that they needed in their lives through different transitions. That's what community is about. Parenting is hard enough as it is, but when we get to do it together and we get to realize, listen, sometimes I may get a chance to speak into your child's life. And sometimes you may get a chance to speak into my child's life, and that's important. That's the ability for us to have these relationships that work together, and so that's really important. We're talking about ways for young people, to manage and handle stress. To manage and handle stress. Now, stress, I know what you're thinking. You're like, what do kids have to do with this? They don't even know what stress is. When I was their age, I used to walk uphill both ways through the snow to your 5 jobs that you worked while you were simultaneously in school and taking care of all your siblings. I know. And it was probably true. But here's the thing about stress or pressure or difficulties. It is not a universal scale. It is a scale that is very relative and very personal. Right? What stressed me out when I was 25 and was overwhelming and difficult and challenging, today I look back and think, what was I so stressed about? That's silly. I could have that for breakfast today. That's not a big thing. But that's because you grow and your ability to understand stress and difficulty and hardship, that grows. Well, when you're a teenager, you're just starting to learn some of these understandings. You're just having some of these stress and anxiety and pressure. And the worst thing you can do is tell someone who's really stressed out and really anxious and really dealing with pressure, you don't have anything to worry about. Don't feel that way. Because then they're like, well, I'm not talking to you anymore. Because whether it would be stressful for you or not is not the question, right? We're not trying to tell them to not be stressed. We're trying to tell them what to do with stress or anxiety or fear or hardship or doubt. And by the way, the ultimate answer is turn to Jesus and allow him to convert your mind and to change your identity. But those are things you get to speak into from relationship. And if the first words out of the mouth is like, you don't have any, let me tell you how hard it was when I was 16. We didn't even have Google. It doesn't help anything, right? So we get to walk through that and walk through that. And then we get to find ways, this is important, parents, for you too, especially if you have teenagers, you find ways to spend time together, whatever that looks like. It's important in this season. It's important in this season. And so here's what I want to do. I want to take the next 10, 15 minutes, and we're going to continue looking at Peter, because the mission statement for youth is no longer this idea of seeing Jesus. Of course, we wanted to see Jesus. And it's not discovering Jesus. Of course, we're still in this process of discovery. That never ends. But we want them in this frame, in this moment, in this time, to begin to experience Jesus for themselves. Apart from mom and dad. Apart from other people. They want to have personal, individual experiences with Christ. And I think anybody who had some really great, incredible experiences with Christ was Peter. Boy, Peter had just so many. I mean, I couldn't go through all the experiences that Peter had, but I want to look at a couple of them in Matthew and kind of tie it up today, because Peter has this big experience, and we've kind of seen it. He has seen Jesus. He has discovered who he is for himself, and he's beginning to hear these teachings, and he's beginning to have some experience for himself about Jesus. So there's a couple of stories that are all pretty close together in a time frame, and I want to pick through them. I'll paraphrase some of them. So the first one's going to be found in Matthew 16. It starts in verse 13, but I'm going to paraphrase this for time's sake today, but you can read the whole thing if you'd like to. But Jesus was in Philippi, and he asked his disciples a really provocative question. He said, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is? What do people say about me?" Now, this wasn't Jesus like fishing for compliments, right? This wasn't like, "Oh, hey, everyone, tell me how great I am." Like this was an opportunity. This was a setup. And so the disciples began to answer all sorts of different things. Like, "Oh, some people think you're John the Baptist. Some people think you're Elijah. Some people so basically it's like some people think you're a prophet, and some people think you're a teacher, and some people think you're all this great stuff." And he kind of gives all these different theories, right? Because they know he's something special. The people, the masses at large, know he's something special based on all these incredible things that he's doing, but they still don't know who he is. You see, they're still in this process of knowing Jesus. They've just kind of seen him. They've discovered everything, but they don't know him yet. And so there's all sorts of theories. So then he asks, "But who do you say I am?" Now, we can look at this a bunch of different ways. But of course, Peter's the first one to chime in, or at least the first one to be recorded. And his answer is really powerful. Because remember, this is the guy, he kind of sometimes steps in it, and he'll still step in it even after this. We'll look at it. But it says, Peter answered that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn it from any human being. Now I say that you are Peter," which means rock, "and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven." Then he sternly warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So all of a sudden, Jesus offers this example. He offers this question, and Peter gives this profound answer, right? And we know that up to this point, Peter's given plenty of not profound answers. And Peter's given plenty of profound whoopsie questions. That's like kind of his go-to. But in this moment, in this time, after spending more and more time, this is towards the end of Jesus' life. This is after years of teaching and time and way more than we even understand. They were traveling together. They were walking together. They were sleeping together. They were eating together. Like they had spent time together. And by this point, when he says, "Who do you say I am?" he says, "You're the Messiah. You're the one that I've been waiting for my whole life that the nation of Israel has been waiting on for as long as we can remember, for longer than our books can mention. We've been waiting on this Messiah. You're the one that everything in the Old Testament is pointing to. It's a big statement. And he said it with conviction, and Jesus said, you're right. You're right. So he walks through this process. He has this experience. Now, some time does pass. When you're reading the story in Matthew, it looks like it's like the very next, there's no break, it just keeps going. But a little bit later, Jesus then starts to say, okay, you've had some experience with me. You know who I am now. You know I'm the Messiah. So he goes through this process and he says, I'm going to start talking to you, the disciples, plainly. Okay, up to this point, sometimes you see this in Jesus' teaching, he'll teach, but it's a little obscured. It's a little hard to comprehend. In fact, you'd see that Peter all the time, like, yeah, like I totally understand it, but the rest of the guys, they maybe don't understand it. So could you explain that to them so they can fully understand what you were talking about to those other people, God? Jesus is like, oh man. So he says, I'm going to start to speak to you plainly. I'm going to begin to express to you and teach to you plainly what needs to happen. And he begins to talk about how I'm going to have to go to Jerusalem and die. Now, if you believe, and again, we have to think about conceptions. Peter just got done saying Jesus was the Messiah, the one who's going to free and redeem all of Israel. The problem is Peter had an idea of how that was going to happen. And the way that was going to happen was not with Jesus dying. That's not how you lead a revolution. That's not how you free captives. That's not how you break the chains. That's not how you overthrow leadership. That's not how you become the new King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You don't die. Like, that's not how it works. At least not through his interpretation. And so Jesus begins to teach about this, and Peter, the same Peter, said, you're the Messiah, the Holy One, Son of God, brings Jesus aside and begins, and this is really funny, to rebuke Jesus and to tell him, hey man, you've got it all wrong. You actually don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to help you out. So he begins to tell Jesus, like, this will never happen to you. It's not going to happen. And Jesus gives this crazy, remember, this is Jesus just a few verses before. It's like, you're Peter, the church will be built on you. You're this amazing guy. And then just a few verses later, he says, get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. And he said later, if any of you want to follow me, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. And he goes on to say some of the most amazing and / a little eerie, where he says, like, what good is it if you gain the entire world, but you lose your soul? And he gives this invitation to follow Jesus. And you know Peter's got to be just like demoralized. Like, he just said, get behind me, Satan. Like, you wouldn't say that to your enemy, let alone a friend. And now we have to understand, he said, you're a great temptation to me. This was Peter tempting, whether he knew it or not, Jesus to do things his own way. But Jesus said, I didn't come to do things in my own way. I came to do things the way the Father told me. And even though there may be temptation in my heart to avoid pain, difficulty, sorrow, and suffering, I will go to the cross with joy because that's what my Father said. And in this moment, Peter's like, no, there's another way. Sometimes you have to be careful about the encouragement you give people, because you may not know when, instead of partnering with God, you may be partnering with the very temptation in their head. That's free. Has nothing to do with you. So he goes through and he gives this teaching. Then, and by the way, and this is something that he's going to experience. So at this point, I feel like if I was Peter, and at first I was like, you're the church. He's like, yes. It's like, you're Satan. It's like, I'm back in the back of the pack again. Even Bartholomew is more important than me now. It's like, I don't even think Judas is going to make it. And I think he's got a higher, like he's back. But then all of a sudden, the very next chapter, Jesus took, it says 6 days later, he took Peter James, and John to a high mountain to be alone. So he takes the 12 and he separates the 12 and he takes the 3, the inner circle, and he says he comes. And Peter may be surprised at this point to be invited since he's Satan. Something happened. We don't know, but he's invited. And he comes. And they come to this mountaintop. And something really crazy, something that's really hard to understand, like this amazing thing happens in front of them, and it says that there's bright cloud comes, and all of a sudden they look around, and there's these other figures who are there with them. So now it's not just Peter, James, John, and Jesus. All of a sudden there's 2 other figures there, and they say that it's Moses and it's Elijah, and like it's this crazy thing, like, oh my gosh, what is happening? We're on this mountaintop, and the presence of God is here, and we've got Moses, and we got Elijah, and we got Jesus. Like, this is a big deal. Something's happening. And Peter, as opposed to just being like, I'm going to keep quiet. I'll give you, like, sometimes you just silence is the best policy. That was apparently James and John's approach. But Peter was like, I got to do something. I got to say something. And so he's like, Jesus, do you want me to make a tabernacle or like a temple, like an altar? Do you want me to make something for each one of you? Like one for Moses and one for Elijah and one for you. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he has no idea what he's saying. They're on a mountain. What's he going to use to build things? Like, he's just like saying stuff. And all of a sudden, this is really powerful. It says that even as he spoke, the cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son, who brings me great joy. Listen to him." It says the disciples were terrified, fell down on the ground, and then Jesus came up and touched them. "Get up," he said, "don't be afraid." And when they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone. They only saw Jesus. In this experience, in this thing that they're experiencing with Jesus, this very real moment that they were scared. When they look up, when everything's left, they only see Jesus. And we could talk a lot about what this represents. Like, Moses obviously represents the giving of the law, and Elijah obviously represents the prophets. Like, and basically what God is speaking out in this moment is like, hey, listen, we're not listening to the law, we're not listening to the prophets, we're listening to Jesus. And there's this moment that Jesus was transformed and transfigured right in front of him. Like, talk about an experience. He literally heard the voice of God. He literally sees God. And this was after experiencing like a forgiveness, after he just kind of did something he didn't mean to. And now he's back in. He's on the in group. But you fast forward and we come to one of the few stories that is recorded in every single gospel. And it is the moment in which Peter tells Jesus at the Last Supper, "Even if everyone betrays you, I will never betray you." Jesus said, "Yes, you will." All 4 recorded this story. All 4 give detail of Peter over and over and over again betraying Jesus. To the moment where he realized what he had done and ran away weeping bitterly. This is the guy who just experienced Jesus. He's experienced the miracles. He's experienced the teaching. He's experienced the time. He experienced the Mount of Transfiguration. And yet, he still was struggling in this process of truly knowing who Jesus was. But do you know what else is recorded in some manner in all 4 Gospels? Matthew does the most general version, but Mark, Luke, and John do a really good job of explaining it. Because although all 4 Gospels record Peter denying Jesus, I think Mark gives the best one-liner. In chapter 16, verse 7, This is when Jesus has appeared to Mary in the garden and she didn't know who he was, and he's giving this good news that he is risen, and he says to her, now go and tell his disciples, this is actually the angel speaking to her, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee, and you'll see him there, just as he told you before he died. Go and tell the disciples, including the one who thought he disqualified himself. Go and tell the disciples, including the one who thought he was an outcast now, or was rejected now, or that could never experience the thing that is the greatest experience that we can have, which is forgiveness. Listen, we hope that our youth experience the supernatural power of God, that they see miracles in their life, that they have prayers answered, that they have the tangible presence of God, that they get to see things happen around. Like we expect and we want to see that. But I'm telling you, the thing that changes your life and takes you from someone who is distant from God to someone who knows God the quickest is when you experience the unconditional forgiveness that comes from Jesus. When you realize I stepped in it bigger than I ever could have imagined, and yet I still found acceptance and forgiveness. And this age group, in which they're stepping out and stepping into new things and finding new freedom, will also make mistakes. And Jesus is there to meet them in the very middle of their worst mistakes of their life at that point. And what they see in that moment is forgiveness. And after Peter experiences a forgiveness that cannot be explained, that was not earned, that was not asked for, he goes on to lead the church in a way that you and I cannot understand. And he goes from being the one who puts his foot in his mouth every other chapter to speaking and 3,000 people being saved on the day of Pentecost, the one who writes the letters to the churches, the one who leads the groups, who experiences persecution and ultimately gives up his life for the cause of the gospel. Because forgiveness makes you see something that you don't understand. It allows you to experience that Jesus didn't just come so that you could see love, although he did. He didn't just come so you could discover how great he is, that he did as well. But he came and he died on that cross so you could experience a forgiveness that says you will fall short in this place. No man or woman is without sin, but I have come to overcome the world, to pay with you with my precious blood so that you can experience freedom and forgiveness. My hope for our youth in experiencing Jesus is not that they never make a mistake. It's that they experience forgiveness. Because I can tell you, when I experienced my moment of realizing how much I needed Jesus, how much forgiveness I needed, it was that moment that I truly knew him. And realize that I want to dedicate the rest of my life to knowing him better. That he's the one who looks at me with love, that I can explore eternally and never fully discover. That I can have experience after experience, but no greater experience than what can be found through salvation and my forgiveness that I can experience in my heart. Even when I make the greatest mistake of my life, he's there. That there's forgiveness in Jesus. That Jesus took Peter to the beach and said, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. To bring restoration and healing and hope. Are our youth going to make mistakes? Of course they will. Will my kids make mistakes? Of course they will. I actually hope they do, so that they can experience the forgiveness of God and see that even when I'm not faithful, he remains faithful. And that is a chain that I cannot break. That though he broke the chains of sin and death and destruction, he then chained me to his righteousness. And he holds me close. And for you, parents, whether your kids are in the nurseries right now or you've got them in the middle of it, I want you to know that that is my heart. That we know Jesus, that we experience his forgiveness. That's my heart for you today. And in fact, maybe you're here today as an adult. You're like, boy, I need to experience that forgiveness. I'm going to give everyone a chance in this room to do it today. And it's as simple as saying a prayer and accepting the sacrifice that Jesus made all those years ago. I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes and bow their heads, and I'm going to ask everyone to repeat this prayer after me. And if that's you, if you want to make that decision today, I'm going to give you that chance to experience the forgiveness and salvation that comes in Jesus. So just repeat this prayer after me. Say, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to die for me so my sin could be forgiven, so my heart could be set free, so I could experience your forgiveness. It's in Jesus' name I pray. With every head bowed for just a moment, if you made a decision today to accept Jesus, would you just raise your hand up anywhere in the room? Just raise your hand up. If you're online, they're going to put a phone number up on the screen, connect you with our prayer team that way. But if you're in the room, you can raise your hand. All right, if there's any hands that are up, they can go down. Jesus, I thank you. Lord, I thank you that there's no greater experience than coming to know you, than to see your love, to discover your faithfulness, to experience your forgiveness, and know that you desire for us to have that our entire lives. So Father God, today, in this church, in this place, thank you that you're here. Thank you that you're in the midst of us. It's in your holy name I pray, Father. Amen and amen. Well, hey, church, last thing before we dismiss, I just want to encourage you, next week, you do not want to miss it. We are going to continue and wrap up this series, but we're also going to be talking about some plans and some ideas and opportunities we have as a church moving forward for all of our kids' departments. It's really exciting news. I can't wait to share it with you. It's going to be a really good time. So make sure you're here, and we'll see you next week. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Go Cowboys!